Welcome to episode 5 of the Aspiring STEM Geek. In this episode, I talk to Ben Kofman, a cybersecurity engineer. In the episode, we talk about how to break into the cybersecurity field, which certifications are relevant, a recent exploit Ben found at a major company, and the most impactful cybersecurity breaches over the past decades. I hope you enjoy this episode. Ben Kofman, welcome to the Aspiring STEM Geek. How are you doing?
Doing well, man. Good to talk to.
I'm excited to have you on. You're the first cybersecurity person I've had on, so that's going to be the focus of this podcast. And I think there's going to be some pretty cool questions.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to it, man.
All right, let's start at your college career. So you went for systems engineering for your undergraduate degree, and you went to University of Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. Okay. So what was a few of your favorite classes there? How did you choose systems engineering?
Yeah, funny story. That was actually the third major that I was in. I started out as an aerospace engineer, and then I switched over to physics, and then I switched over to systems engineering. Kind of had a hard time deciding what I wanted to do, and I think I settled on systems engineering because it's a little bit more general. The other two majors are pretty specific, and even though they're really awesome, I didn't really want to lock myself into a very specific discipline just because I didn't know that I'd want to work in that field long term, and I really had no idea what I wanted to do at that time. So the classes that I like the most, probably anything with programming. I had one class my senior year where we just built built a robotic car from scratch. I had to solder the electronics, there was a starting point, but it required a lot of C programming as well, to program the microcontroller. That was pretty cool. I hadn't really done a lot with that before, so that was also my first time getting exposed to the C language as well. And then at the end, you had to program the robot to dance. So that was fun. I got it to dance to Purple Disco Machine song. So
that's awesome. Do you have any videos or pictures? I'll embed them.
I do have a video of it, actually.
Okay, awesome.
Bad, but I'll probably send it to you if I find it. I think I do have it though.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then my other favorite class was my senior, kind of like the senior capstone project. I think pretty much every engineering student does one of these where maybe it's just a systems engineering thing, but you have a group of other students that you're working with, and you basically just get attached to local companies and stuff. So we were helping out this local manufacturing company in Peoria, Illinois, and most of their business actually came from Caterpillar, which is the largest employer in that area. So I think they had 80% of their revenue was from Caterpillar. So Caterpillar ever, went under or maybe left Peoria or something.
No bueno.
Yeah, no bueno. But that was cool. I did mostly business intelligence for them. I just programming stuff in Power BI and building dashboards, completely unrelated from the rest of my major. But anytime I get to start programming or learn something new, that was fun, because under the hood of Microsoft Excel and Power BI, there's some pretty complicated data queries and manipulation that you can do on that. So that was fun.
That's funny. Wait, did you say Ada, like the old school programming language?
No, it's like Power Query.
Oh, okay.
Microsoft Excel Power Query. Yeah.
God.
Heard of that? What is that?
Oh no, just get the last podcast I did. My buddy had a class that their professor forced them to do Ada, and it's this old school language that it's really hard to find information on and program in. So I'd be like, it's kind of funny tie-in. But as far as why you chose systems engineering, I totally get it. So my undergrad was finance and econ, but the second time around, once I figured out I didn't want to do finance, statistics, it was a broad enough field where if I wanted to go into the biomedical field, I could do biostats. If I wanted to do hardcore programming, that was an option. I totally get why you would want to do a more broad field. And then you're currently a cybersecurity engineer. How did you figure out you wanted to do cybersecurity, or how were you introduced to it? And you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Let me try this out.
Yeah, I was introduced to it by the military. Like being in the National Guard, I branched cyber in the military, and at the time I was a junior in college, and I still had really no idea. I was doing systems engineering. I still had no idea what I wanted to do, and I thought it'd be really cool to try to branch that, and I did. And I basically just started learning from scratch security concepts. I got my Security Plus, and I found it really interesting. I thought it was kind of like there's just so much to it, and it's such a wide field, and there's so many different things you can specialize in. So that definitely drew me into it. And yeah, out of college, I applied to jobs. Like it's funny, I got this engineering degree from a good engineering school, but the first job out of college was absolutely nothing related to engineering. It was as a security analyst at like a medium-sized healthcare company.
Mm.
And at that job, I was basically just copying and pasting Excel cells, which was not fun at all. And that was kind of doing a GRC task, which is governance, risk management, and compliance. Um, so that was not as technical as I'd hoped, but the hardest part about breaking into cybersecurity is just getting a job at all in the first place, and that it did accomplish that task. But the field that I was most interested in the whole industry was offensive security, penetration testing, and
Red
I
teaming,
eventually got
cool
it.
guy
Red
stuff.
teaming, yeah, cool guy stuff, and so I got my. I studied pretty hard for like 6 months for my OSCP, which is kind of like the most well-known offensive security certification, and then from there I was able to break into that field. So it's kind of an unusual path, and truthfully, my major did not prepare me at all for what I do now. But maybe I learned some things that maybe some skills that I apply today, like just being able to learn complex topics in a short amount of time and just being resourceful and using Google and any resources available to you to accomplish a task.
Yeah, I totally get it. And kind of working, it's similar where you have a lot of people with very varied backgrounds in data science or machine, well, starting to get more into machine learning. But that's the cool thing about tech is you can have such a different background and then get into it, which I
Yeah.
really enjoy. The one thing that you mentioned, I guess I didn't think about when you got Security Plus. So certifications are pretty, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're pretty big in cybersecurity. And I I'm not the biggest fan, but if it's coming out of college where you kind of need something, it would make sense in college. But if you all, it goes back to me for, I just think a lot of it is you need hands-on keyboard actually doing stuff, and that's the best way to learn. I'm just curious about your opinion on certificates because I think you were getting the CISP when I first met you.
Yeah, no, your idea is kind of spot on, like how I view it as well. Certifications are definitely super helpful to get your foot in the door. In fact, the way I see it is that's pretty much all a certification can do. And there really is no certification that if maybe there's a couple that are, very difficult to get, specifically in cyber, other fields like maybe you want to be a cloud architect, AWS or GCP, they might have more complex certifications that you actually really need experience to pass those. And those will really demonstrate your experience and knowledge. But within cybersecurity, I think certifications are great when it comes to padding your resume and getting your foot in the door for an interview. But just because you have a certification, but I mean that you're qualified for, say, a senior cybersecurity engineer, senior offensive security engineer job. The number one thing, like you said, is experience, because that's where you really learn how to do the job, and that's where, and ETFs and reading books and doing Udemy courses can only get you so far. Most of what you learn is hands-on on the job. So
Mm.
I a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with certifications. A lot of people think they're completely useless. I don't think that's 100% true. I think that the industry as a whole is definitely pretty bloated, especially when it comes to the type of certification where you have to get it every 3 years. At the end of the day, that's just a money grab. And if you're in a job, I probably piss off a lot of people by saying this, but if you're in a job that requires you to maintain the certification, a lot of government jobs are like that. It's really like it's not actually demonstrating that you're qualified to do the job. It's instead just checking a box for compliance reasons. Maybe the certification will tell an auditor that this person knows what they're doing, but it doesn't actually demonstrate that you're qualified to do that job. It's your experience and your skills at the end of the day that give you your qualifications.
Yeah, I guess we're on the same page on that. So
Yeah.
you mentioned the CTFs, which are capture the flags. Curious, when you were first getting into coding, programming, cybersecurity, is there a memorable CTF that you did, or one that you enjoyed, or one that you really hated?
Yeah. Um, I don't do ETFs in my free time a whole lot. I think having a work-life balance is pretty important. But when I was studying for the OSCP, I did probably hundreds of kind of CTF boxes on things like Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, OffSec Proving Grounds, um, different sites where you might need a paid subscription or you can just access them for free, and then just spin up a VM on their site and try to get a user foothold and then escalate your privileges to root. So I did hundreds of those to prepare for that certification, which is a 24-hour hands-on hacking certification.
Mm.
Um, I've also done like a SANS Net Wars CTF. That one was a lot of fun. Essentially, split over the course of a few days, and you're in groups of teams. And the one that I did, they have all sorts of different CTFs with different topics and categories. The one that I did was mostly focused on log analysis. So, for example, there's TCP logs and packet logs that are on a machine, and you just need to answer questions by searching through those logs, filtering through the different protocols, and finding different data in those. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, that's kind of I'm not like a huge CTF player just because again, like doing your job, maybe doing a little training at the end of the day. If you're the type of person that does that, more power to you. But I take them as they come, but I don't seek it out too much.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a good study tool for sure. I will say, just last thing on certifications, if it's hands-on keyboard and it's not just multiple choice, then I think that definitely has some sort of value.
You- yeah, yeah. That's why it's seen as that's why it has the reputation that it has. And when and getting that certification is hard, especially if you don't have any experience. It does demonstrate that you have a baseline of skills. You know how to use the Linux terminal. You can do basic tasks like port scanning and basic, web application exploits. But it doesn't mean that, even if you have the certification, it doesn't mean that you are an experienced penetration tester. You might not even be able to call yourself a penetration tester unless you've been working in the industry for a certain amount of time. It just means that you have the basic skills and aptitude to do the job. So
Makes sense. All right. Well, sticking early on in your career, I saw that you had a co-op at Nokia. Just curious how that was, if you learned anything, what you enjoyed from it, if anything.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was my first time learning different, technologies. That was in the middle of when I was studying engineering in school. I'd taken a lot of math and engineering and mechanics courses, but I didn't have a lot of experience with programming other than like different projects that I had done on the side. That was my first kind of deep dive into Python, everybody's favorite programming language.
Definitely, it's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, and so I was working on what we were working on was basically basically a website with a suite of different tools that supported the department that I was working in. So they had a huge database of requirements, which are essentially just files with, uh, the file type just has a bunch of text and images, and it has a lot of technical proprietary information. And we were building a tool that can search through that. We're implementing some natural language programming to find a requirement based on a particular text input. But yeah, I was working on the back end for that, specifically the searching feature, and that was all built in Python. I think it was actually a Flask website, which is a super easy web framework to use. And it's funny, looking back, I realized that like I had never really programmed before that much, and I thought it was really cool to program like when you're writing something like I didn't realize that the best way to program is to do it like as efficiently as possible, always trying to find a library. So I didn't even like look for a library that could do something
It's
simple.
just built a
And I
whole.
would just code it out myself, and I thought it was so cool. And I had such a good time. At the end, it was this like I had a heap of code that could probably be reduced to like 10% of what it actually was, but it was a lot of fun. Python's a good language to learn for anybody who's starting out, and super flexible and adaptable. And
Yeah.
then I also what were you gonna say?
No, no, I definitely just second Python being a good starter language. But
Yeah, I
go
know
ahead.
you're a big Python guy.
Pythonista.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely check out the rest of Adrian Dolanay's YouTube channel. He's got some
Uh,
good Python videos in there.
like and subscribe.
Yeah, I can just subscribe that. But yeah, that in that co-op, also did some like kind of basic system administration work, which was pretty cool. That website was deployed to the rest of the company, massive company, like over 100,000 employees. Although I'm not sure how many they have now.
Hmm.
Um, Again, like so, deploying that internally, it goes through a huge process of, setting up basic things like single sign-on, TLS certs. So I did got some kind of basic security engineering experience there, um, and then also just deploying it. So deploying a web application, putting it behind a reverse proxy, load balancing, doing some stress tests. That was a lot of fun. Definitely got some more experience with using Linux in general. Before I didn't have a lot, and so that was a great foundation. I actually really enjoyed that internship and that co-op because those are just super useful tools. Python and Linux, having that experience, I think anybody who's working in technology, those are kind of like your ABCs. So
Yeah, no, that's really good experience having to do both the front end and back end development. That's I'm actually trying to I totally reworked my website. I know back in the day you saw it, you're like, what is this? But it's a lot cleaner now. And one thing I'm trying to do is I know you were trying to mess around with Go when I first met you. So I'm writing the back end in Go, so it's taking some time. But man, it's not an easy experience to like spin up an EC2 instance, be like, troubleshooting, trying to get a live
yeah,
server. It's like, this still isn't because I'm trying to set up a coding environment. So I'm trying to run Jupyter Hub, and yeah, but it's daunting. So having that right off the bat for an internship, that's pretty cool that you had that.
yeah. I remember I went through all that when I don't. It's not live right now, but at one point I was hosting my own website with a blog and just some projects that I had worked on, and I was hosting those. And yeah, there's a lot of various skills and a lot of small tasks that you have to accomplish to make sure it's running. It can't be easily hacked in 2 seconds. It doesn't crash or go down. But it's kind of fun. It is a little annoying kind of because there's just some things that you don't think about. But a lot of these cloud providers, they have these serverless technologies, like Lambda functions in AWS, and
Hmm.
they even have different services where you can get put a static website up without even, just supplying the HTML and JavaScript, and you don't have to worry about managing instances or anything like that. And that's honestly a good option too, so you don't have to deal with all the hassle. But I do think going through the motions of, spinning up an instance and making sure the DNS configurations are correct. It's a good kind of baseline to have. So,
Yeah, so
uh,
much troubleshooting.
yeah,
All
yeah, for
right.
sure.
But sticking with the cybersecurity end, so you're an offensive cybersecurity engineer, and one of the things for people that are don't have much experience with cybersecurity or who are learning about it, just like myself, what's the difference between defensive and offensive?
Yeah, so defensive is a huge, field where basically anybody who's working in cybersecurity, you can kind of consider yourself defensive, whether that's working as a SOC analyst, security operations center, and monitoring logs and alerts and triaging those and responding to those, or you're performing incident response. There's a known event in your network and you need to respond to, and that can also defensive cybersecurity can also classify as security engineering. So implementing different tooling like firewalls or endpoint detection, even security architecture, where you're sort of designing your system and figuring out the best way to secure a network. It's a huge field with a huge amount of roles and opportunities. And then offensive security is a little bit more specialized. I'd say it's more
Elite.
proactive. Well, yeah, but um, yeah, it's more specialized. It requires a specific set of skills. Um, but yeah, at the end of the
I,
day, you got that reference.
you sound like a I'm a specific that's I forget the movie Liam Neeson.
Take it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad you got it. Um, but yeah, it's proactive at the end of the day. So you know, you need cybersecurity, you need defensive cybersecurity. If you're a major corporation or company with any, foothold or with any, um, footprint on the internet or out there at all, you need to have some level of security. So it's an absolute must have. And some people look at offensive security as kind of a bonus. I don't see it that way, but at the end of the day, a lot of companies will employ pen testers and red teamers just to check compliance boxes and get their SOC 2 audits or HIPAA audits or whatever. But major corporations, because they have more funding and more resources, they often employ their own red teams that are just constantly looking for security vulnerabilities in the network perimeter, or running social engineering campaigns on their employees to try to bolster their company's defenses. But yeah, it's just proactive versus reactive at
Yeah.
the end of the day.
So that you mentioned social engineering. So something I guess a offensive cybersecurity person might do. You're not trying to hack other people. You're trying to help the company with its own cyber defenses and awareness. So the social engineering would be like a testing how people would react to a potential phishing email, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many different ways you can social engineer somebody. I'm not like a red teamer per se, so I wouldn't call myself an expert, but you can, fish them over email. You could call them, try to get them to download something, try to get them to give you their credentials. um, send them a malicious email with a let's say a Word document or something that'll execute a payload and get persistence on their computer. You can even phish somebody over Slack or other types of instant messaging. And at the end of the day, it's just the goal is to get an initial foothold on the network, whether that's them giving you their credentials, or they're executing some sort of malware that you crafted so that you can gain access. Um, and yeah, we do these things so that we kind of prove that there is, weaknesses, and it's a learning experience too, because, you know, sending a very simplistic phishing email doesn't always work, but there's levels to this, and you can definitely make it more complex. And the more an organization is exposed to different ways that their employees could be convinced to do something, the more that they be prepared to educate their employees and also to build detections around, a particular type of vector that a threat actor or a red teamer would use to get into a network.
Yeah, makes sense. One of my first job in finance, they caught it early, but I got phished. I clicked a hyperlink that I should have. Realized that the email name is like, oh, that's not the financial officer's actual email. So
Yeah,
that was not a
happens to the
fun.
best of man.
Yeah, but it's good that it happened when I was lower level, and it's like, oh,
Yeah,
dumb kid. But
you'd be surprised. It can happen to anybody, no matter how experienced you are. I remember I actually clicked a training email one time, and I was actually working on the security team, and I literally clicked the training email, and then after the webpage load, it's like, hey, you just failed this phishing assessment. You have to take like a 30-minute course or whatever. And I'm like, I probably should have caught that, considering that I
yeah.
I know the person that's running these tests. So
Wait, did I email that to myself?
that's how you know it's a good one. If you get yourself, then it's a
Yeah, I
really
was
good,
like,
a
damn,
really
I'm
good
good.
phishing campaign.
All right. Well, I guess we might get into the weeds a little bit. So, you recently wrote an article about a vulnerability you and other colleagues found where a malicious actor could utilize the platform to create a botnet and use that botnet to launch distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks. So, I linked the article in the description below. Can you talk about how you found that vulnerability? Can you also explain how that service can be turned into a botnet? And I guess also starting from the top, what is a botnet and what is DDoS?
Yeah, yeah. So this was an engagement that I did recently with a colleague. We're testing this. I purposely kept it vague in the article, because there aren't that many platforms like this. So using a little bit of open source intelligence and maybe some chat GPT, you could figure out pretty easily who it is. But they've actually since remediated it, so not that big of a deal. But this is a data. I mean, this probably sounds so generic to you, but it's like a data analytics platform specifically for,
Well, that's a good
um,
thing. It's anonymity.
I guess, yeah. That was my intent when I wrote the article. But this is just like a data ingestion platform, so you could send it your data from all different sources. It could be like web pages. So they have an API that, somebody browses to a web page. It just sends your tracking information to this data source. And at the end of the day, this platform that we're testing is kind of like a middleman where it ingests all of your data from all the different sources. It can show you the analytics of where it's coming from, what time, how often, that sort of thing. And then it forwards it on to maybe other data analytics platforms or data warehouses like AWS Redshift or different data storage cloud platforms. But the 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 interesting thing about this product was that you know the actual requests, the HTTP requests that are sent, go through this one API, and the actual API, I'm just like kind of wrapping my head around how it worked.
Mm.
It was a pretty flexible product where you can, it takes, let's say you get an HTTP request, it's got a body with certain information, like for example, a user ID, or they click this link. So in that body, you've got the user ID and they've got the link that they clicked. That's data that you want to process further. And one of the things that you could do with this data is you can then, send another request. What they call them functions. You can send that request to, you can either, it's called ETL, so extract, transfer, and load. So it's basically just performing different manipulations on the data. If it's like it comes in a format that isn't super readable, it'll parse that and then send that along. But at the end of the day, these functions, whether they were performing manipulation or sending them on to their final destination, which is some data warehouse, at the end of the day, these are just JavaScript functions,
Mm.
likely ran in AWS Lambda. So these are just serverless functions that scale extremely quickly, super cheap to run, and they're just running some code. And they didn't have any like real restrictions on what you can put in this code. And so, as I was testing this, I was thinking like this is all going to a single API endpoint, and you can run whatever you want in these functions.
Could you
Why not? Yeah,
briefly explain what an API is?
yeah. So API is application programming interface, essentially just a website without a front end.
Mm.
So the same way you communicate with the web server to get like an HTML page that renders in your browser. When you send, when you send when you put Google in your browser, it'll make a bunch of requests. One of those requests will be for the HTML to show the Google page in the search bar. And then when you type in something in that search bar, that's being sent to an API, specifically a search API. So it's all just talking over HTTP, and you're just basically sending data to receive data. You're getting, you're putting in an input to get an output. And so this function essentially, I just had the thought like if you can send whatever you want, and it's a super scalable API, just it takes a bunch of requests. What happens if we send a request from within itself back to itself? And it just kind of goes in this loop. And then you could literally put two requests in the function, and then it'll just scale exponentially. And what's interesting about it is because it's back using serverless technologies and it didn't actually enforce a rate limit,
Mm.
it would just scale indefinitely. And so you can run whatever code you want and use that to like, target somebody, target any other website and just send like a flood of traffic to any website by using this sort of exponentially scalable platform. It's just part of building a product. You need a threat model, like how might an attacker from within your platform. And this could almost be considered like a business logic
Mm.
vulnerability where we really just use the native features of the platform, but we thought about how we can abuse this to harm other organizations.
Yeah. No, that's pretty wild that you could take a function from one website to attack another website. And I'm just imagining somebody from this company looking at the bill. It's like, what is this?
Yeah, it was running. So when I tested it, I let it run for like, I actually looked back at the logs. It said that I ran it for 2 minutes, but like it literally felt like every time I refreshed the page, it went from like first time I refreshed the page, I had sent 200 requests, and then I refreshed again, and all of a sudden it's like 10,000. I
Jeez.
refresh again, it's like 500,000. I refresh again, it's like 5 million. It just went up so quickly because it's backed by an infinitely scalable cloud service that's backed by an exponential function. It's just going to like scale to infinity. So I stopped it pretty quickly, but
Mm.
you know,
Yeah, that's cool that you found it, and that's definitely, the article is worth a read to explain that. And sticking with some cybersecurity stuff. So obviously, cybersecurity hacks can be devastating, but is there an exploit? You go back to whatever period of time, could be Stuxnet, whatever. Is there one where you've read about it and you're like, this is actually impressive to pull this off? For for me, it's kind of SolarWinds, and I'll link a description to that because for that one they had to stay patient and they got into the system for a long time and they waited to attack, and that's what was impressive to me. But I'm just curious if there's a cybersecurity event that you're like, that's pretty technically impressive.
Yeah, it's a really cool question. And honestly, the two that you mentioned are the first that come to my mind. There's so many instances of maybe nation states getting into very lockdown organizations for a long period of time. And but the place that I learned the most about sort of like this history of like big hacks is probably the Darknet Diaries podcast. It's a great podcast, and he's done some awesome reporting on it. From that podcast, my favorite episodes were about the NotPetya ransomware. So that was in 2017. That was a Russian worm that basically abused two or a few CVEs that had just been released.
And
So
CVE is critical vulnerable.
it's common vulnerability
Oh,
exposure.
okay.
I should think I should know that,
Yeah, it's
but
cool. But so it's like that. And when CVEs, they're when they kind of get their name CVE, that means that people kind of know about and they need to start patching something, right?
yeah, they're assigned a CVE when they're you inform the vendor of them, but at the end of the day, they're 0 days. So 0 days are vulnerabilities that have never been discovered before, and they're just fine. They're it's like the first time they've been exploited. Um, so in 2017, this group called the Shadow Brokers released. They basically dumped some tools that the NSA had, and two of the one of these tools was Internal Blue, which was a 0 day that targeted Windows systems and basically gives you full root access to a Windows system. It's called remote code execution, and it's basically just a point and click exploit that could be easily chained with other tools to gain access to systems. So what this worm did, and it's funny because there was another ransomware in 2017 called WannaCry, which is also very famous. It chained this exploit together with this other tool that had just been released called Mimikatz, which just dumps credentials. So once you have root access to a machine and you run Mimikatz on it, it'll dump password hashes.
Mm.
Actually, I think it'll dump full passwords on that Windows machine. And so these network worms just chain together these two exploits, basically just getting remote code execution, getting onto every Windows system it could find in its local network, dumping the password, which gives it access to other Windows systems, which can then discover other ones that are vulnerable to this newly released exploit. So these worms were some of the most destructive ransomware incidents. And I don't know the exact numbers, but it was a huge deal when the NotPetya worm came out, and it was supposed to be targeting Ukraine at the time, but it affected a huge number of organizations, and it caused a lot of billions of dollars in damage. From what I remember,
Mm.
those were some really interesting episodes I remember listening to. But as far as the most impactful or the most interesting, I think SolarWinds is probably definitely maybe the kind of the most impactful because supply chain compromises are super impactful because you can as opposed to targeting an individual organization, you can target countless organizations that rely on a particular software that you've exploited. And I think for 9 months, whoever did uh, SolarWinds, I think most people would agree that it was the Russians. They had access to a huge number of organizations, and for over 9 months. So that one was definitely a big deal. Stuxnet is definitely deserves a lot of love as well, because it was just, for its time, incredibly technically competent, and I still don't think we've seen anything quite like it, just from the complexity of the actual malware that they had to build, that would spin these
Centrifuges or
spin
something.
the centrifuges faster and faster without being detected. And first of all, they had to even get the malware implanted in the facility in the first place, which was air gapped, so it didn't have any connection to the internet. They probably had to drop some USBs or something. And then this malware had to be was also kind of a worm, because it had to eventually spread to the systems that controlled the centrifuges and then run without being detected. And of course, it was detected at some point, but you know, to to build a malware that sophisticated, targeting industrial control systems and manufacturing equipment, requires a ton of preparation and expertise. Um, I think recently it's not really a cyber exploit, but I think what Israel did to Hezbollah recently is definitely was also kind of craziest example of supply chain compromises we've seen, where they literally were the supply chain, and they built this entire pager company and sold pagers specifically to Hezbollah that had explosive implants on them that would detonate, from hearing a particular radio frequency. So
Hmm.
that, I think, that's not cyber per se, because it's not, affecting an exploit over some protocol. It's just, sending a signal to remote
Hardware.
detonate. But yeah, I mean,
Okay,
it
I
could be
mean,
considered a hardware exploit.
yeah, because I
Yeah,
mean, Stuxnet's kind of like you said, air gaps. It's a little bit it's complicated, but yeah, that
right.
was a wild story recently with what happened in the Middle East and Lebanon specifically with that. I remember I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, you know who, and we were just briefly. That is a pretty wild thing that happened, and
Yeah.
but kind of. So you mentioned shadow brokers at the beginning. I remember we were talking at one point, and you made a really good point about, man, they give these APTs. I forget what a APT stands for, but it's a threat actor.
Advanced persistent threat.
Yeah, and they give them such cool names. So you might have a hacker group, and they get the name Shadow Brokers, and then I saw one recently, and they named it like Kitty something. It's like somebody's listening to Ben, and they're not giving them cool names anymore.
Just an engine. Yeah, I think one of the big ones now is like Scattered Spider. That one. CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company that likes to. They kind of use that as part of their marketing. In my opinion, it's almost a weird thing, because you're kind of glorifying these hacker groups. So I don't really know. I mean, look, if I was a hacker group, I want to have a cool APT name. I don't
Yeah.
want to be something like, I don't know, like Scary
Scattered
Tiger. I don't know. Just
spider.
Scattered Spider is pretty cool too. Like, but yeah, it'd be kind of lame if you're like a super advanced APT and your name is like,
Fluffy kitty.
Fuzzy Kitten or something.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's
I think it's just marketing, to tell you the truth. That's my tinfoil hat. I mean, I'm
yeah.
sure I'm sure there's people out there that are saying, like, like you have, like, this is called threat intelligence. This is how you track groups. You have to, find their TTPs and group them together so that you can track them eventually, you know, find the people that were actually behind particular hacks and whatnot, and defend against them by tracking their tactics, techniques, and procedures. But companies like CrowdStrike, although they absolutely have to be aware of, like, how these hacker groups operate, they do, like, if you go to their website, it's a huge part of their marketing, and it's all over their Super Bowl ad. They kind of turn these hacker groups into almost like fictional characters that people start to glorify. It's a
Yeah, I'll put up
interesting thing.
I'll put up CrowdStrike's Power Ranger like APTs on here so people can take a look. I'm also gonna all the cyber events that we talked to, if Darknet Diaries or somebody else has a really good summary that does a deep dive. I'll also link this in the description as well. All right, so we talked about how for cybersecurity you can kind of have a varied background. If you're set on getting into cybersecurity, you're a college student, or you're just looking to get in the industry, what recommendations do you have for somebody that's get looking to break in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I can speak mostly to the offensive security side of the house. When it comes to just general cybersecurity, I do think it does help to have prior experience in IT or software engineering. But specifically with offensive security, um, I think anybody can start out and get into that field. That's sort of like kind of a baseline, I think, for anybody that wants to be, a pen tester, because at the end of the day, the exploits that you're discovering have to be written in a particular language. If you don't understand, basic programming flaws or logic errors, how are you going to think about ways to exploit this system? Um, but as far as breaking into the field, like going back to our original conversation, there are certifications that are super helpful at doing that. Like, for example, the OSCP um, is a great one if you want to break into pen testing. That's something that employers and recruiters look for and definitely value. Um, so if you want to go for that one, it's not cheap. That's definitely a big asterisk to it. It's not cheap, and I actually paid for it out of pocket
Mm,
because I just took a gamble on myself and just went for it, and it paid off. But having basic experience and Linux terminal programming, understanding like basic networking concepts like the OSI model, going from the application layer all the way down to physical layer. You have to have a framework to operate in this space, because at the end of the day, all of these systems, the ones you're defending or the ones that you're exploiting, they're built on a particular foundation, so you have to have a strong foundation and computing in general. I think that's pretty common nowadays. Like if you're completely brand new, you don't have any technology experience, you're a long way from, just to be blunt, you're a long way from starting out cybersecurity. Because there is a level of, you know, knowledge that is required to get into the field. But if you're already working, technology, even if it's like help desk, you already know how to use a computer. That's a big thing from the start. And so working on the fundamentals like networking, basic programming skills, um, those are all things that can help. And doing things like, hack the box, or even getting a particular certification like a networking certification, that'll just build on your foundation.
nice. No, that's all awesome. And anything relevant, I'll link here. I will say it's lately I've been making a lot of. I'm just to get your take on this. It's I'm more doing this for fun and honestly content for my YouTube channel, but I've been doing a lot of stuff like spinning up a virtual machine, a VM, and I highly get it. If you're somebody that wants to get into actually understanding computers and really want to do a deep dive, highly recommend getting a virtual machine, whether it's VirtualBox or I use VMware. But I've been breaking Linux machines, so RM,
Yeah,
RF,
machine does.
yeah, the so like deleting the root directory, and it's funny because I initially I was just doing this like, oh, it's make some content, but then I started to realize like, oh, I'm actually kind of learning some stuff about it. So I just made one with fork bomb, and it's like, okay, like fork bomb, that's not ideal, but it's not gonna break your system like deleting a lot of files in the root directory,
Yeah.
because I totally bricked a VM doing that. But yeah, one thing I've been thinking about more is if I had exposure to virtual machines and I could just run wild with it, then I think I would have been on a better path to being a better programmer earlier.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I actually build kind of a home lab. That's another thing people always recommend for getting started in technology or cybersecurity, is just building a home lab. And beautiful about virtual machines that you don't need to buy a bunch of equipment. You can just download operating systems and, you know, partition out your disk and, set up a virtual network. And then, you can even set up an Active Directory environment if you want to learn how to secure Active Directory or hack Active Directories. Another thing to get into is containers. Containers are super awesome. It's
Yeah,
definitely super, super convenient.
Docker has been coming a lot on my podcast. I'm a big container Docker fan. It is a really cool tool. So I
Yeah,
second that
absolutely.
again.
Yeah, a lot of the tools that I run like on a daily basis, like when you're hacking, when you're doing penetration testing, there's a lot of command line tools that you could use. There's a lot of just basic, like command line, but also, certain web-based tools. And like it's a pain to install everything on your host machine because you might not
Yeah.
have the necessary, prerequisites. And Docker just makes that so easy. All you have to do is pull the image and just run it in a container. And most of the tools that I use are just running out of a Docker container.
Yeah, I may have messaged you about this, but I was trying out Splunk Enterprise for the first time, and it was through a Docker image. So I spun up a container where you can run Splunk just to get a better idea of how it works. And it's such a cool tool. Or one of the final cybersecurity questions I'll ask you. So container programs like Docker, that's an awesome tool. Virtual machines, if you want to emulate the whole computer, that's also really cool. Anything else? I know when it comes to cybersecurity, Kali, a lot of people talk about that. Just curious on your take if that's a good program to learn, or if you don't have an opinion, or you're not, if you'd recommend something else over Kali. Just curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, yeah, I have an opinion. I actually, when I started out, I downloaded Kali Linux. I logged in and I thought I was like a super elite hacker. But at the end of the day, it's just an operating system with a bunch of tools installed on it. And a lot of people, when they're starting out, they look at all these tools and they think, gosh, like there's so much to learn. There's so many different tools. They all do different things. This is just going to take a long time to learn. And it's like, it's so cool. Like every time you run, nmap, you feel like a hacker. But like, tools all have a very specific purpose. Like when you're building a tool in the first place, it's just to fill a gap that another tool can't do. But understanding, the purpose, and most importantly for offensive security and pen testing, understanding the actual underlying exploit to that, is half the battle. And the tool at the end of the day is just that's literally what it is. It's a tool. Um, and so, you know, getting into pen testing, there are certain tools that are sort of like indispensable. Kali Linux is, again, just an operating system that you can download, and it's got a lot of the stuff preloaded for you. But if you don't know kind of like, what you need to do, how to even use that tools, then it's useless. You can install everything you need on, Ubuntu or even Windows. Um, Tool that I use the most because at my job I focus mostly on product security, so web applications, mobile applications, desktop applications, um, like software products. The tool that I use the most is Burp Suite. And at the end of the day, like Burp Suite has a lot of fancy buttons and switches, but really it's just a proxy for HTTP traffic between your browser server that you're targeting. Just proxies the traffic, and then you can, resend requests, send requests called intruder, just basically automate sending requests. Um, and that's kind of like the gold standard of web app pen testing and any sort of pen testing that uses HTTP. So if you're interested in that, you're eventually going to need Burp Suite. There's some alternatives to it, Like Kaido is a free alternative to it. I used it a little bit, but it's not as built out as Burp Suite is, and Burp Suite does have a paid edition, which has certain things that the free edition is limited on. If you want to get into pen testing, you're gonna eventually need to know how to use Burp Suite because everybody that's in pen testing has a foundation in web app pen testing. So that one's a great one to get started out with. And the way that you learn anything is not by just downloading it and clicking around. You actually have to do something with it. So go to try Hack Me or Hack the Box or something like that. Find a web app CTF site and try to hack those. The Portswigger Academy. Portswigger is the company that built Burp Suite, and they have a whole academy free to use that has just a ton of different labs for hacking web apps. And it'll explain to you how certain vulnerabilities arise, how to exploit them, all the different forms that they may be in. And then they actually have like live labs that you can practice on. So that one is kind of the one that's most near and dear to my heart. When it comes to network pen testing, there's a lot of different like niche tools, especially if you're doing Active Directory pen testing, there's a lot of different tools that, do different things. I'm not as familiar with that, but again, like platforms like TryHackMe, they have a bunch of different labs that'll teach you how to use them. And at the end of the day, it's like if you go through this, you start to learn basics of how to use it. You realize that a tool is doing something that you could probably program yourself and script out yourself. It just speeds up the process for you, and understanding like what your final goal is the most important thing, as opposed to just knowing how to use a particular tool.
Awesome. That's really great to know. All right, we're going to move into the last section, the fun questions. So we're both fans of house, and I remember when we were jamming out to Daft Punk and you had EDM festivals going on your computer and you were playing that. So it's funny because your intro and outro song is going to be One More Time by Daft Punk. So
Again, like, cool. It's a good one.
Yeah, so who are your favorite artists? Is house your favorite genre? And if not, just favorite artists, what other type of music you into?
Yeah, definitely. I've been an EDM fan for a long time. My favorite artist, the one that I probably know the most songs is like, he's not as well known. His name is Kashmir. Spelled like KSHMR. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got some big hits, but in general, he's not as big as like, Tiesto. But I probably know like 30 or 40 of his songs. He's my favorite. And then Tiesto's kind of like the GOAT. I mean, you just can't go wrong. I think when last time I saw you, I was blasting those festivals specifically like, and Tiesto's on at like Tomorrowland or something, watching that on YouTube and then like doing some hacking, like you can't go wrong. It's just it gets you hyped up. Let's see who else. Yeah, Tiesto, Kashmir, Alok is a good one. I don't know. There's so many. There's so many good artists.
Yeah, EDM. So I'm a big lo-fi guy, especially graduate school. You know lo-fi girl, right?
Oh yeah, I mean who doesn't?
Yeah, heavy. Like I just even before I was going to graduate school, I was studying for a finance certification. I just had lo-fi girl there, and she was my muse, and she got me through some rough studying. So it's just super calming. But I've definitely also had more upbeat, just like boomstick type EDM when I'm like gonna go crazy with programming. So
it has to fit the activity. Like if you're studying for something, if you're reading something, like getting hyped up probably isn't the vibe you want. I've been listening to like synthwave chill on Spotify. There's a playlist for that. Have you listened to that one?
Yeah, well, I like, just the genre in general, and they have some random cartoon character like Bart Simpson, or they have Rick and Morty, and they're just in a car just driving. So yeah, I definitely have done that before as well. To if I'm even just reading an article on a website, I'll throw it on.
Yeah, a lot of those cover photos are like 80s retro, like,
Yeah.
the sunset and like neon colors and stuff. And like, you picture yourself driving down like a highway in the 80s, but those are good to like study and chill out too.
Yeah. So, have you had any? Some of my favorite concerts have been EDM concerts. Like, there's this artist. I think he's pretty obscure by now, but Klingon Day. I just remember we went there. It was so sick. They were playing and they actually had a guy on a sax and he came out. It was a small bar that we were in and this guy was just going crazy with the sax and we were just, but just curious if you have any concerts that you're like, yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't been to that many. I'm one of those people that listens all the time, but like I don't really go to concerts or festivals that often. I saw Zed live at a festival once.
Nice.
He's and from older, like from maybe like
Back
10
in the
years ago or
day.
something, but back in the day, but that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Um,
I saw Chainsmokers. Do you know Red Rock in Colorado?
yeah, yeah, I think you told me about that. That
Yeah.
probably was pretty awesome.
It was such a sick venue. Unfortunately, I flew in and I got a little sick, but I was just kind of like drooling a little bit. And I really I can't think of it off the top of my head. I was waiting for a specific Chainsmokers song and didn't come in, but yeah, I it's been a while since I've been to a concert, but the concerts are so sick. Um, then okay, last question. All right, when's the last time you played Apes IO?
Dude, like an hour ago, right before we started recording.
Yeah, I tried to
I'm just
access
kidding.
I tried to access it earlier. It's like, oh, well, I use Firefox a lot, and unfortunately, Firefox is kind of starting to break.
Yeah,
And
Firefox is kind of dying out, unfortunately.
yeah, that was my go-to browser. But I have a couple browsers that I kind of switch around. I'm trying to use Brave more, but yeah, I tried Apes.io. So for those that don't know, it's kind of like a Fortnite knockoff, and they have these big apes. And Ben
Dude,
was in
Fortnite is a knockoff of apes.io. Let's get that clear.
Apes.io. Yeah, no, it's because I did want to try it out because I remember you were playing it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, but I never actually played it. And then I tried it now. I was like, ah, man, maybe it might be Apes.io might be RIP already.
Yeah, for the record, it's not like I was playing it religiously. It's just like, here and there, load it up and,
80
shoot a
hours
few
of
marquees.
Apes.io.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah. Good time.
Ben Kofman, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. It was fun.
All right, thanks everybody.